Hello everyone and welcome to Live with Janome. I'm Miriam Coffey and welcome to my studio. I'm sorry for being a little bit late today. I'm trying something new and had some technical difficulties, so my apologies. So let's go ahead and get started because today we're going to be learning how to attach a piping or pom-poms using your zipper foot. Now traditionally, so actually this is an example of it. This is a pillow with some piping around the edges. So traditionally you can use an actual piping foot. So Janome has two different kinds of piping feet. I'm going to show you this. So this is the I foot. I'm going to switch angles in a second. Okay, so I'm going to try to. So I'm going to switch here. So these are the piping feet. This is the I foot and the I2. Now what makes these special is that on the back of them there are these little grooves, and that is where the piping will actually go. One of them you will set into when you are making your piping, and the other one is for when you actually attach your piping. Because you can use either pre-made piping or you can make your own so it customizes and matches with your project, whether that is a pillow or a bag, or even the binding of a quilt can look really pretty to have a small piece of piping around that. So we're going to show you how to do that. And then also, one thing I want to point out before we go over the zipper feet is that the nice thing about both of these piping feet is that they have this little cutout right here. And I'm going to see if I can zoom in a little bit more. So if you look closely here, there's a cutout so that when you are attaching piping and you're going around a corner, such as this, let me pull one of these out. This is going to, let's flip it over here. So this little cutout is going to fit in around that so that when you're going around, it doesn't get smashed like that. It wouldn't get smashed or it wouldn't push it out of whack if this did not have that cutout. It would make it a lot easier to do that. So the reason there is an I and an I2 foot is because they're both different sizes. But the problem, so that's, the channel, that is. So both of here, this one's smaller, this one's larger. And the I2 is the smaller one. Now what happens if you are working with piping that is either much larger or much smaller than the two piping feet that you have? That's when the zipper foot comes into play. The nice thing about that is you can use any size. So you can use some nice thicker cording or piping here and then some thinner. And you can even use the same technique to attach pom-poms, such as this. It makes it a lot easier to be able to attach piping and pom-poms when you are using the zipper foot, because you're going to be able to place your zipper foot right next to it, and with the ability to move your needle all the way over to the inside, you can get a really nice snug fit. And we are going to stitch this down so you'll be able to see it a little bit closer, so it'll make a little bit more sense. So let's zoom back out for you for 1 second, and I'm going to show you actually, let's go over the two different feet that we have, the different options that we have. So we have your traditional zipper foot, which is this E foot, which I love this foot for several reasons. One, because it does have this little safety in the center, so a safety hole, so that when your needle's in the center position, it's going to stay, it's going to be right there in the middle. And, sorry, this is sliding. One of the nice things about having that centerpiece is not only for safety, but if you are working with decorative zippers and you want to be able to see more of the pretty tape on the sides, having the needle in the center position will give you a little bit more exposure of the zipper tape and not just the teeth itself. So with the E foot, you can see that there's that center hole, and then on either side there are cutouts, and that allows you to have a fair amount of play within the needle positions that you can place your needle. When you have it all the way over on one side or the other, so this is a 9mm machine that I'm going to be sewing on. Sorry, this keeps sliding. Let's see if one more time. There you go. When you move your needle all the way over to the one side, so let's say this is a 9mm machine, because I'm going to be showing you on the CM17. When I have my needle all the way in the 9 position, it's going to be all the way over on this side. And then when I move it over to the 0, it's going to be over all the way to this side. So I can butt up my needle against either the piping, the pom-poms, or whatever it is that I need to get really close to. So now the majority of Janome machines are going to have a zipper foot pretty much standard. Depending on the machine that you have may differ. If you have a 5 or some 7mm machines have their zipper foot looks a little bit different. But if you have this one, it's going to work exactly like this. The other benefit of using the zipper feet is you can actually, we have a zipper foot for our AccuFeed right here. So this is actually our single prong AccuFeed foot, and it's going to come with this base with it currently. This is what it's standard. It's going to come with the VD foot. But just like all AccuFeet, the bottom piece is coming off. So now I don't need this one, but I want to attach the zipper one, which is the ED. So now I can attach that zipper foot to the base of my AccuFeed foot, and now I have the exact same foot as my regular E foot, but I have the additional feed of my AccuFeed, which makes it really nice if you are working with quilted pieces, such as if you're, let's say, adding piping to a pillow and you've decided to add you've quilted a pillow and you decided to add some piping. That is going to be a little bit hard to sew with, just with your regular E-foot, because you may not be able to get close enough to it because there's so much bulk between the, 6 layers of, 4 layers of fabric, 2 layers of batting, and then either the piping, which has 2 more layers, or your pom-poms. So by having your AccuFeed, that allows you to feed your fabric really nicely, but still get really close up to whatever you need to get close to. So I'm going to show you a few things before we switch to the machine. So let's pull up some of the piping that I've made here. So this is a piece of cording that I have covered with fabric that I have chosen. Now, when you are working with something small, such as this, you don't have to do it on grain, you don't have to do it on bias, excuse me. I find it to be just as easy to do it on straight grain because it's so small you don't have to worry about it not being able to go around corners or puckering too much because it's such a small piece. But if you are working with a larger cording, I do suggest switching to a bias. You may not necessarily have to do a full 45-degree bias. This is actually done on a 60, so it uses a little bit less fabric, but it gives you still the ability to curve and do turns without all of this puckering and laying. Not very nice. So I have first made my piping, and the way I do that is we will make some here, but I move my needle over, not all the way over, but just towards the inside, so that when I sew the second time, I'll move my needle all the way over and it will get even snugger. So when we sew this, I think it will make a little bit more sense. So let's go around to the front of the machine and I will show you how to do that. Let me grab a few things before I head over there. Oh, and also before I move over, I do want to point out, when you are doing your bias fabric here for the piping, I do suggest always go bigger. You can always cut it down later. It's a lot easier to sew down your piping when you have a nice big extra fabric here. If you're trying to sew on with, if this was, you know, let's say a 1/4 inch smaller, this would make it a lot harder to feed and to attach. By having something bigger here, it's a lot easier to feed, to attach, and make sure it doesn't slip. All right, so let's go to the front of the machine. And we're going to sew this down. Okay, so let's wake up the machine. I'm going to switch angles here. Now, so this is some piping here. So this is, I'm going to show you just the tail end of this, and then we'll actually attach it down. So first I'm going to move my needle to, actually I have it around where I want it. I want it at, for a 9mm machine, I have this at 1.0. There are also, if you go into your, if you have a machine that has sewing applications, there are sections for piping, like it shows you how to do it, but that is with your piping foot and not with the zipper foot. So that's why I'm going to show it to you this way. So the way I do this is I'm going to first, like I said, start by moving my needle over to the 1, which you can see is on the far side, on the far left-hand side of my foot. I also have increased my stitch length a little bit to about 2.8, could go up to 3. That's just because it's not necessary to do a very tight stitch for when you're just making your piping. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to lower my foot and just make sure that my foot is really snug up against my piping. And now I'm going to just sew until the end here, and then we're going to show you how to put it on. So as you can see here, I'm going to stop with the needle down. The needle is not hitting all the way over here because I do want to be able to make it even snugger the second pass when we actually attach it. So I'm just going to sew to the end. Okay, so I've hit the end of my piping, so I'm just going to cut that. And you can see how having that excess fabric makes it a lot easier to feed. I have a lot more space to hold on to, and I'm not working with this tiny little piece of fabric that would make it hard to attach on some of these next steps. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is we're going to attach our piping. So it's going to look like this when it's done. So let's go ahead and sew this piping down. So I'm going to use just this fabric here. Now there are a couple ways you can do this. You can either just hold it down if you're working with kind of projects that are straight. If you are working with anything that is curved, or if your fabric is particularly slippery, it may be helpful to either pin it or use clips, or I'm a big fan of glue sticks, so you can actually just put a whole little bead of glue down here, and this is a fabric glue stick. You can also just use like Elmer's glue, the school sticks. That works great too. This just has a finer point, which is nice. So I'm just going to place my piping right on top here. So now, because this is glued down, I don't have to worry about this shifting. It's going to stay in place until I sew this down. So I'm going to move my needle over a little bit more. I'm actually going to put it at 0.5, not all the way, because we're going to do that one more time. We're going to be sewing this once more. So there's actually 3 seams that you end up doing. You do, well, that is if you're making your own piping. If you're using pre-made piping, then you only have 2. But if you are making your own piping, you're going to do your first seam, and I do that a little bit more towards the center. And then the second seam is, again, once you're attaching it to one side of your project. And that I do a little bit further to the left, but not the farthest point left. So now let's go ahead and sew this down. And I am pushing up against the piping here because I am getting a little bit snugger fit because I'm getting a little bit closer. And then I'm just going to cut this. So now you can see there are 2 stitches here, but I only see 1 on the back. And now the next thing to do is if I'm going to attach another piece to this so that it would either be a pillow or a bag or whatever, even the edge of a Peter Pan collar, piping looks adorable when you do that. So let's have our piece right here. So this is my piece of fabric. Actually here, let's see if we can show it on this angle. So that is my piece of, so we're going to pretend this is my project. And we're going to sew this piece of fabric on top. I don't actually that angle I don't think is very good. So I'm going to move it back over here. So I'm going to place this back on top of here, sandwiching it. So now I have my backing, my piping, and then my other piece of fabric, whether that's your lining or whatever that may be. Now I'm going to, again, you could either pin this, you could clip this. I'm going to pin it here just for a quick second because it can be a little bit easier, I think, when things are pinned and secured versus having to hold things in place. Especially when you do things live because everything always messes up when you go live. It's Murphy's Law. All right, so I have this pinned down now. So now, here, let's move it this angle. I think you might be able to see that a little bit. I have this pinned all the way down. And now I'm going to sew this down, except when I sew this down, I want to do 2 more things. First of all, I want to move my needle all the way to 0. So you might have been able to see that my needle is moved all the way to the utmost, the farthest left point. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to sew this down, but I'm going to sew from the opposite side because I want to make sure that I am stitching at the very least on this black line, but ideally like a hair or 2, a thread or 2 on the inside. That way I know it's even more snug and that I'm not going to see any residual stitching from either my piping seam or the attachment seam. So let's go ahead and lower our foot. And I'm just going to readjust it so I make sure that my needle is really snug right up against there. I can remove these pins. And then I'm going to start sewing. So I'm going to stop here and you can see, you should be able to see, or I hope you can see, let me move this up, see if you can see that a little bit better. There is my first seam and my needle is even further to the left, which I'm getting a second seam there, which is making it even tighter. And just remove those pins. Oops, sorry. Cut my threads. And now you can see there are 2 stitch lines. So this first one is the one we just sewed down, which was the black, and then the one that we just stitched down, or sorry, the first one on the right hand side is the attachment seam, and then the one on the left is the construction seam. And again, we only have 1 seam on this side, so now when we turn it all the way, you're going to have a really nice snug fit and you don't see the previous stitch line because we've used that other line, the previously sewn line, to make sure that we stitched over that. And then I could either just press that or whatever else I needed, or I could even do a top stitch. I could even lower this down and move my needle all the way over to the right hand side, and then I could top stitch this down and get a nice sort of edge stitch there if I wanted. Let's actually lift this, and I'm going to quickly show you the same concept with pom poms. So on the pom poms, you don't actually have to sew down. You don't have to construct it because that part is already done. All you have to do is pin it down. You have to sew your first seam, but it's going to be done exactly the same. So here, let's just have this piece here for an example. Pull this back. So again, I could use either pins, glue sticks, whatever, but when I am working with pom poms, I do have a tendency of pinning or gluing, sometimes maybe even both, and doing a little bit more because they are a little harder to work with because they are a little more slippery. So I'm going to just lay this out a little bit easier over here. And I'm just going to quickly pin this down in a couple places, and then we'll sew this down. So when I do this one, let me actually just move my needle all the way over again. Not quite all the way over. I'm going to just move it to 1, just like I did before. All right, so now, and that is again if you are working with a 9mm machine. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower my foot. Now I'm going to use the edge of my foot with the edge of my raw edge of my fabric. And I'm going to use that as a guide as well, because right now my first swipe or first pass of my sewing machine is going to be just to attach it, and then the second would be to make it more of a snug fit. And that's why I want to make sure that I have my stitches a little bit further to the right so that when I sew my second seam, it's going to cover up that first one. And sometimes you may have to like move the pom-poms around. You may have to finagle them a little bit more than you do with some of the other, with the piping or such. So let's just use that as an example. So now I have my seam here. Now when I sew the other piece, I'm going to make sure, just like I did before, make sure that my next seam is even further to the left. That's when I would move my needle all the way over to 1 and place my fabric. I lost my other, here it is. Nope. I'm going to just use the scrap here for a second because I can't find the piece that I was planning on using. So we're just going to attach this. And again, I am pinning this into like a little sandwich here. And I could even, since I am working with Quilted, I could even move and put my AccuFeed foot on if I wanted to. But I'm just going to leave it here for now. So now you can see I've got this attached. I have my lining, the pom-poms, and then this other backing fabric. And I do have my needle moved all the way over again, the furthest it can go. Actually, hold on, I think my top thread is going to come undone. Let's get a little bit more. And my goal is to sew further on the left-hand side. So I want to make sure that I'm on this side of this previously stitched line. Cut our threads. And then now we have our that our pom-poms sandwiched in between. So now we have the back part and then our front, and we've got the cute little piping or pom-poms sandwiched there in between. Now I'm going to move over here for just 1 second. Now that I've shown you guys how to attach piping and pom-poms of any size to your projects of whatever that may be, the possibilities really are limitless. Your creativity is totally up to you, and you've got tons of options here. So I hope you guys are excited about trying the zipper foot and your AccuFeed zipper foot, the ED foot, to attach all of your piping and pom-pom dreams, because there are so many fun things you can do. So thank you guys for watching again. I'm Miriam Coffey, and I will see you guys next time. All right, bye-bye.